Picture this. Sunday lunch. The whole family is together, the kind of afternoon that feels warm just thinking about it. Your grandchild reaches across the table, grabs something without asking, and before the moment even fully registers, you say it. Quietly, naturally, the way you've said it 1,000 times before. That's not how we do it, sweetheart. Maybe you adjust how they're holding a fork. Maybe you tell them to say please. Maybe you soften a rule their parent just said. Oh, it's okay, just this once. You're not thinking about it. It's instinct. It's love. And yet, something shifts in the room. It's not loud. Nobody says anything. But it's there. A brief silence. A slight change in your son's expression. Your daughter-in-law glancing down at her plate. And just as quickly as it arrived, the moment passes. Lunch continues. But something small, something almost invisible, has moved. And if any part of that felt familiar, if you recognized yourself in that moment, the first thing worth saying is this: what you did came from love. Full stop. There's no other way to read it. When you've spent years raising children, when you've held that role of guide and protector and teacher for so long, the instinct to step in doesn't disappear just because the children in front of you now belong to someone else. It becomes part of how you love. It becomes as natural as breathing. And this is something that happens in almost every family, in every culture, across every generation. Grandparents who are present, who are involved, who genuinely care, they correct, they advise, they redirect. Not because they're overstepping, not because they think they know better, but because staying quiet when they see something feels, in that moment, like withholding care, like looking away when they could help. There's something deeply beautiful in that impulse. It means you're still there, still engaged, still showing up in the way that has always felt most natural to you. And anyone watching from the outside, really watching, would see exactly that. They would see someone who loves their grandchild, someone who wants the best for that child, someone who has earned, through decades of experience, the right to have an opinion about how children are raised. So none of what comes next is about questioning that love, or about suggesting you've done something wrong. It's more like holding the same moment up to the light from a slightly different angle. Because sometimes, not always, not inevitably, but sometimes, the most loving gestures carry a small layer we can't quite see from the inside. And becoming curious about that layer, gently, without judgment, might be one of the kindest things we can do for the people we love most. Let's go back to that moment at the table. Your grandchild reaches for something. You correct them. Simple, immediate, done with care. Most people watching would see exactly what it is: a grandparent teaching a grandchild. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming. The natural reading of that moment is warmth, experience, guidance. And that reading isn't wrong. But here's what's easy to miss. There's another person in that room experiencing the same moment in an entirely different way. The parent. And for them, something else may be happening. Not something dramatic. Not something they'd necessarily be able to name right away. But something quiet. Because in that fraction of a second, before you stepped in, there's a chance they were already about to respond. They may have seen exactly what you saw. They were processing it, building toward their own response. And then, the moment was gone. Handled. By someone else. And what they're left with isn't anger. It's something more subtle than that. A small, almost wordless feeling of having been moved aside. Just slightly. Just enough to notice. And the tricky part is that it happens so fast. And it was so clearly done with love. So there's nothing to say. Nothing that would even make sense to bring up. You can't tell someone, please don't love my child in front of me. So the feeling stays quiet. It gets folded into the afternoon. And lunch continues. There's something worth pausing on here. When a parent corrects their child, it's rarely just about the fork or the please or the volume of their voice. It's also, and this is the part that often goes unspoken, about something much larger. It's about being the person their child turns to. The person whose standards shape them. The person who holds the line. Parenting, especially in these early years, is a quiet and constant act of building something. Structure, consistency, trust. And a big part of that building happens in small moments that don't look like much from the outside. A gentle redirection, a held boundary, a tone of voice that communicates, I see you, and I'm guiding you. These moments accumulate. They form the architecture of a child's sense of who their parent is. So when that moment is intercepted, even gently, even lovingly, it's possible that something more than a correction has been disrupted. It's possible that a small brick has been quietly moved from one wall to another, and the parent feels that, even if they can't fully explain it, even if they would struggle to justify why it matters. And once you see this, it's hard to unsee. What feels like stepping in might, from across the table, feel like being stepped over. Not intentionally, not maliciously, but in that small, accumulating way that rarely gets spoken about, because there are no words that wouldn't sound unreasonable. There's another version of this moment that's even more delicate. The parent has already begun responding. They've started their correction. And then your voice comes in, maybe a little softer, maybe a little quicker, and adjusts it. Changes the tone, softens the consequence, or simply offers a different version of the same lesson. It's okay, they're just a child. Don't be so hard on them. Come on, let them have it, it's Sunday. These phrases come from a beautiful place. They come from the part of you that remembers how fast it all goes. That knows childhood is short and tables should be filled with joy. And there's real wisdom in that perspective, real tenderness. But here's what's easy to miss. For the child, something just happened. They were told no, and then they were told yes. They were redirected, and then the redirection was undone. And children, even very young ones, are extraordinary observers of these dynamics. They don't analyze them. They absorb them. They begin to form a quiet understanding of how the room works, who sets the rules, and who softens them. And this is the part that tends to surprise people. It's not that the child learns to misbehave. It's subtler than that. It's that they begin to understand, on some wordless level, that a certain kind of appeal, a look, a pause, a turn toward grandma or grandpa, might change things. It's a map they didn't mean to draw, but the moments drew it for them. And here's where something else might slowly begin to shift. Not in a single Sunday. Not because of one redirected fork or one softened rule. But over time, over many small moments that each feel harmless on their own, there's a chance that the parent begins to change their behavior. Quietly, without deciding to, without even fully noticing it themselves. They may start waiting a little longer before correcting their child when you're around. Not because they've stopped caring about the behavior, but because there's a chance that if they say something, you'll say something too. And then they'll have to navigate two things at once: their child's behavior and the dynamic that correction creates in the room. So instead of risking that, they pause. They let things go that they might otherwise address. Or they step out of the room to handle it privately, away from the complexity of the shared space. Almost no one notices this happening. It doesn't announce itself. It just gradually becomes the way things are. The parent becomes a little quieter in those moments, a little more careful, and the warmth of the family table stays intact on the surface, because everyone is navigating around the thing that's never quite been named. There's something deeper worth sitting with here. For most grandparents, being the authority in a child's life isn't just a role. It's an identity that was built over years, decades even. You held that position with your own children. You were the one who decided, the one who corrected, the one who shaped. And that version of yourself, wise, experienced, essential, doesn't simply retire when the next generation arrives. So when you step in with a grandchild, it's possible that part of what's happening isn't just about this child, right now, today. It's also about a self that still knows how to do this, that still has something to offer, that still belongs at the center of the family, not at the edges of it. And that is a completely human thing to feel. The shift from being the primary authority to being part of the support system is one of the quietest and least discussed transitions in family life. Nobody really prepares you for it. Nobody sits down and says, your role is changing now. The center of gravity is moving. It just happens, gradually. And sometimes the corrections, the stepping in, the adjusting, sometimes they're a way of staying connected to a version of yourself that still feels necessary, which makes this so much more than a question of parenting style. It's also, maybe, a question about belonging, about how love looks when a role shifts, about what it means to still be important in a family that is now organizing itself around different people. And here's what's interesting about timing. The very same word, the very same gesture, can land entirely differently depending on when it happens. A grandparent who pulls a grandchild aside later, quietly, away from the loaded moment. You know, sweetheart, it's nicer when we ask before taking, is doing something that feels completely different from stepping into a correction that's already underway. The content is the same. The love behind it is the same. But the effect on the room, on the parent, on the child, it shifts. Because in that quieter moment, nobody is being overridden. Nobody is watching their authority be redistributed. The parent's correction stands intact. And then, separately, gently, you add your layer. Your experience, your warmth, and it can coexist without collision. There's something worth pausing on here. It's possible that one of the most powerful things a grandparent can do in a correction moment is simply wait. Not because they have nothing to offer, but because their moment might be coming just slightly later. And in that waiting, something important is preserved: the parent's confidence in front of their child, and the child's understanding of who holds the line. This is a small shift, but it might change quite a lot about how the same love is received. Over time, if these small moments repeat, something else can quietly emerge. A slight distance in communication. Not a falling out. Nothing dramatic enough to point to, but a cautiousness, a holding back. The parent may visit a little less comfortably, may choose activities that don't create as many of these shared correction moments, may change the subject when something comes up, may smile and nod in a way that feels present but isn't quite. And the grandparent may sense something has shifted without being able to identify what. The warmth is still there. The love is still there. But there's a thin layer of something between them that didn't used to be there. And because it was never named, it can't be addressed. So it just sits there, quietly, becoming the background of the relationship rather than a thing that could be resolved. This is the part that tends to surprise people most. Not that conflict arose, but that the distance came from moments that felt like love. Moments that were love. And yet something in the accumulation of them created a quiet withdrawal neither person fully intended. The good news, and this really is good news, is that none of this is fixed. None of it is inevitable. These are patterns, not destinies. And the fact that you're sitting with this at all, turning it over, looking at it from a different angle, that itself is already something. Maybe the shift isn't about correcting less. Maybe it isn't even about correcting differently. Maybe it's something even smaller than that. Maybe it's just about pausing for one breath before stepping in. And in that breath, asking quietly, is this my moment or theirs? Not because your moment doesn't matter. Not because your experience doesn't count. But because sometimes the most generous thing love can do is make a little space. And in that space, the parent finds their footing. The child sees who leads. And the grandparent becomes not a voice that competes, but a presence that holds everything together from somewhere deeper and steadier. That's a different kind of authority. Quieter, maybe, but it might be felt more strongly than any correction ever could be. If this gave you something to think about, consider sharing it with someone who might find it helpful too. Sometimes the most important conversations start with a video like this one.